They looked down on a weak, defenseless black child, easy to blame, easy to crush by an unjust system. The police thought they could arrest her with nothing more than a vague description. The prosecutor thought he could manipulate the case without any resistance. Captain Reynolds believed he could silence her forever. But they chose the wrong person. Maya was not just a 12-year-old student. She was a legal genius, a sharp mind that even the judge had not anticipated. She exposed the truth, peeling back layer after layer of deception, pulling the entire system into the light. And this time, those who once manipulated justice would be the ones judged. The courtroom was so silent that the tapping of a pen on paper could be heard. Curious eyes were fixed on Maya Jackson, the 12-year-old black girl standing in the middle of the trial. Facing her was Judge Richard Wallace, a man with silver hair, thick glasses, and a sharp gaze. He was notorious for his harsh rulings, someone who was not easily impressed. Wallace adjusted his glasses, then lightly tapped the gavel on the desk. A brief smile flickered across his face, but it was devoid of warmth. "All right, young lady," the judge said, his voice low but firm. "Let's play a little game, truth or lie." A few chuckles echoed in the courtroom. It seemed like everyone thought this would be a quick test, a way to show that Maya was just a child, nothing more. But Maya didn't laugh. She stood straight, her sharp gaze unwavering as she stared directly at the judge. Wallace leaned back in his chair, feigning comfort, then threw out the first question. A person is innocent until proven guilty, truth or lie? A simple question, a core principle of law. Everyone knew the answer. Truth. That was what everyone expected from the girl, but no, Maya didn't hesitate for a second. She answered decisively. Lie. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. A few whispers arose from the back row. A woman placed her hand over her chest, almost in disbelief. Prosecutor Callahan raised an eyebrow, a mix of amusement and surprise. And Wallace? The smile on his face froze. The judge leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, and looked at Maya with curiosity. "Oh?" He tilted his head, his tone both mocking and probing. "Well then, explain yourself, young lady." Maya took a slow, steady breath, then looked directly at Wallace, unwavering. "In theory, yes. Everyone is considered innocent until proven guilty, but in reality, people like me, black people, are considered guilty the moment they lay eyes on us." This time, the courtroom didn't just stir, it nearly erupted. Some people nodded in agreement, while others whispered in astonishment. Wallace fell silent, his gaze sharpening. Maya continued, her voice unshaken, even oddly calm. "If I were a white child wearing a hoodie that day, would I have been arrested immediately? If the police didn't have solid evidence, would I have been dragged into court without proper investigation? What is the truth?" She paused briefly, letting the question hang in the air, then concluded in a soft yet weighty tone. "The truth is that justice is not for everyone." A heavy silence enveloped the room. Wallace froze, clearly not expecting this answer. He glanced around the courtroom where many people were whispering to each other. No one was laughing anymore. No one saw Maya as an ignorant, naive child anymore. She wasn't just smart. She knew far more than a 12-year-old should. And that made Judge Wallace no longer find this game amusing. The hand of Judge Wallace tightened slightly around the wooden gavel. He stared at Maya Jackson intently, as if trying to peel back each layer of thought in her mind. Facing a 12-year-old student with enough calm and sharpness to expose injustices right in the middle of her trial, he knew that the game was no longer under control. But how did a little girl end up here being tried like a real criminal? Rewind a few days ago. That evening, Maya Jackson sat in a quiet corner of the public library, the soft yellow light casting down on the pages of the book she was engrossed in. It was a book on constitutional law that she had borrowed not long ago. She had always loved law, but never thought she would get involved in it in this way. The library door suddenly burst open. 3 police officers rushed in, their flashlights sweeping in every direction, their eyes scanning as if hunting down a dangerous criminal. The people in the library jumped, some even dropping their books onto the floor. Maya frowned and looked up, but as soon as she lifted her head, she saw them charging straight toward her. "Hands up! Sit still, don't move!" Before Maya could react, 2 rough hands grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her. "What are you doing?" The librarian's voice trembled. "This girl hasn't done anything." One officer, seemingly the leader of the group, turned to her, his gaze cold and unshaken by the protests of those around him. "We've identified a suspect involved in a store robbery. The witness described the suspect as a black boy wearing a hoodie, and this is our suspect." No one said anything. A deathly silence enveloped the room. "A boy?" Maya blinked. "I'm not a boy." "Shut up!" another officer barked, tightening the handcuffs around Maya's small wrists. "She hasn't done anything. She's been here all night." A student sitting nearby protested. But they didn't care. The only evidence they had was a vague description, but that was enough. A black kid wearing a hoodie? No investigation, no evidence, no consideration. The silence before the storm. Maya was dragged out of the library under the stunned gazes of the people. A woman pulled out her phone and started recording. A man yelled, "This is unbelievable!" A child cried at the sight. She didn't struggle or scream, but in her eyes was a fire that wasn't easily extinguished. Her small wrists were tight in the cold handcuffs, and the murmurs and protests echoed in the air, but none of that changed the fact that Maya was shoved into the back seat of the police car like a criminal. The car drove off, leaving behind angry stares and phones still recording. The wave of outrage erupts. Hours later, the video of the arrest spread like wildfire on social media. The hashtag #Justice for Maya appeared everywhere. Furious comments flooded in. "A child arrested just for wearing a hoodie. This is crazy. Is this justice? Just a senseless witch hunt. Did they even investigate? Or is just seeing a black person enough to convict them? But was the public outrage enough to bring justice? Because this system doesn't care about outrage. It only cares about control. The puppet master in the shadows. In an office covered by glass windows reflecting the city lights, a man placed his coffee cup down on the desk, his eyes still glued to the computer screen showing the video of Maya's arrest. Beneath the screen, a name was printed in bold on the file. Police Captain Frank Reynolds. The man slightly curled his lips, his hand resting casually on the desk, tapping out a slow rhythm. In his cold eyes there was no sign of regret or hesitation, only calculation. Beside him, Prosecutor James Callahan stood with his arms crossed, his eyes clearly filled with anxiety. "It seems like this is getting bigger than we thought," Callahan said, his voice low, betraying his unease. Reynolds remained calm, not turning his head. He reached for a file, flipping through its pages with deadly composure. "It's all just meaningless noise." Reynolds chuckled softly. "Public opinion will rage for a while and then forget. They always do." "But what if it doesn't die down?" Callahan swallowed hard. "The girl, she's not as simple as we thought." Reynolds paused for a moment. In his eyes there was a brief glint of amusement. "Then we'll teach her a lesson." He lightly tapped his finger on the desk, signaling for Callahan to look at the file in front of him. Inside, a plan had already been laid out. A fake case, a non-existent suspect, a child chosen as a scapegoat. Maya Jackson had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what Reynolds didn't know was that he had chosen the wrong person to trap, because Maya Jackson was not an ordinary child. She was the nightmare this system never saw coming. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere became suffocating, like a rope tightening around the breath of everyone present. Judge Richard Wallace leaned back in his chair, narrowing his eyes as he observed the 12-year-old girl standing in the center of the room, her small hands still shackled in the gleaming metal cuffs. Maya Jackson didn't bow her head, didn't shed a tear, didn't show any fear. Instead, she stared directly at the judge and then spoke clearly, her words echoing in the silent, suffocating air. "I will represent myself." Shock swept through the courtroom like a violent wave. Maya's mother, Angela Jackson, took a sharp breath, her eyes clearly showing fear mixed with helplessness. She clutched at the edge of her dress, as though wanting to pull her daughter back before things went any further. "Maya, you can't." She shook her head, her voice breaking. But Maya didn't turn back, holding her gaze steadily on the judge. Across from her, Prosecutor James Callahan let out a mocking laugh. "Represent yourself?" He shook his head, trying to hold back the laughter, but unable to hide the derision in his tone. "Little girl, this is not a classroom game. This is a court of law. Do you think you're a lawyer?" Maya remained unmoved. "I don't need to think. I know I can do it." Her confidence froze the smile on Callahan's face. All eyes turned to Judge Wallace, waiting to see how he would react to the unprecedented request from a 12-year-old girl. Wallace didn't mock her, nor did he show anger. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes hidden behind thick glasses, gleaming with a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Then, prove it, little girl." Wallace tapped his gavel on the desk, signaling for the officer to remove the cuffs from Maya's wrists. The sound of metal clashing rang sharply as the cuffs slid off her slender wrists. Maya gently rubbed her wrists before looking up. She was not afraid, because this was no ordinary trial. This was a real battle of wits, a villain who underestimated his opponent. Callahan clicked his tongue, his impatience clear in his gaze. Deep down, he didn't consider Maya a threat worth worrying about. To Callahan, this case had already been decided. Maya Jackson had been chosen as the scapegoat. The evidence had been arranged to close the case quickly. Justice? It was just a performance to appease public opinion. Maya was just a little girl, powerless, with no status, merely a pawn in a larger game. But what Callahan didn't expect was that this pawn would turn herself into the player. Maya stepped into the fight. She walked forward, her sharp eyes glancing at Callahan before turning to face the judge. "Before we begin, I have a question," Maya said, her voice calm to the point of being chilling. "What do you want to ask?" Wallace asked, folding his arms. "Do I have the right to a fair defense?" Callahan laughed, waving his hand as if not wanting to waste time on such a meaningless question. "Of course you do, but—" "Good," Maya interrupted, her voice icy. "Then treat me like a real lawyer." The steely confidence in her voice made the contempt in Callahan's eyes vanish instantly. For the first time, he felt real danger. Not from an opposing prosecutor, not from an experienced lawyer, but from a 12-year-old girl. Maya took a deep breath and then turned to face the jury. Let's reconsider this case. She was ready for the battle, and no one in this courtroom could stop her now. The courtroom door opened, and a man walked in with a slow but unwavering gait. All eyes were on him. This was the witness that prosecutor James Callahan believed would help him achieve his final goal, convicting Maya Jackson. Callahan watched him with a confident look, as if this was the final piece he needed to close the case. He had won hundreds of trials with witnesses like this, people whose testimony was just enough to plant doubt, but not clear enough to be exposed. He had done this countless times before, and this time would be no different. The witness stepped up to the stand, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a face lined with the wrinkles of time. He cleared his throat slightly before sitting down, scanning the room with his eyes before they finally settled on Maya's face. Maya showed no signs of fear or anxiety. She stood there silently, observing the man as though she were trying to peer beneath his exterior to uncover the truth within. Callahan approached the witness stand, adjusting his tie before speaking in a commanding voice. "Did you see the defendant, Maya Jackson, near the store where the theft occurred that evening?" The man hesitated slightly, his gaze shifting to Callahan before he nodded slowly. "Yes. I saw her near the store on the night the incident happened." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Some jurors exchanged glances. It seemed they were partially convinced by this testimony. Callahan smiled, then turned to Maya with a challenging look. "I think that's more than enough," he emphasized each word. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant was near the scene of the crime. The witness who was there has confirmed it. We don't need to argue further. The defendant committed the crime." His voice was firm, as if the case were already closed, but Maya remained unfazed. She didn't show any sign of fear or confusion in response to Callahan's accusations. She took a deep breath and walked toward the witness, her voice clear and composed. "You said you saw me near the store that night?" The man swallowed. "Yes." "When exactly did you see me?" He blinked, and Callahan furrowed his brow, clearly not expecting this question. Around 8:40 p.m. A tense silence enveloped the courtroom. Maya smiled slightly, as if this was exactly what she had been waiting for. She slowly reached into her pocket, pulled out a small piece of paper with a faint but clear stamp. She held the receipt high and turned her gaze to Judge Wallace. "Your Honor, this is irrefutable evidence." Callahan's frown deepened. He stared at the paper Maya was holding, trying to figure out what she was going to do next. "This is a receipt from the city library," Maya continued, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. "It clearly states that I checked out a book at 8:42 p.m. at a library over 2 miles away from the store that was robbed." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Jurors gasped, some whispering to each other. Judge Wallace raised an eyebrow, while Prosecutor Callahan looked as if he had just been splashed with cold water. Maya took another step forward, her voice stronger than ever. "If the theft happened at 8:40 p.m., how could I be in both places at once? I can't be at the crime scene if I was still at the library counter receiving a receipt from the librarian." Callahan clenched his jaw, flipping through the files on his desk, desperately searching for a way to counter this. "This doesn't prove anything," he stammered. "Maybe she checked out the book earlier and went back to commit the crime." Maya shook her head gently, as though she had anticipated exactly this response. "Then look at the timestamp on the receipt." She raised the paper higher. 8:42 p.m. That means at 8:40 p.m., the time the theft occurred, I was still at the library counter receiving a receipt from the librarian. If you want to prove I committed the theft, you need to prove I could teleport from the library to the crime scene in less than 2 minutes. The courtroom fell into a deadly silence. Callahan stood frozen. The witness looked clearly bewildered. The jury whispered among themselves. Judge Wallace placed both hands on the desk, his sharp gaze fixed on Callahan. "Prosecutor Callahan, do you have an explanation for this?" Callahan opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. He knew there was no way to break this truth. Maya had cleared her name. She had shattered the entire case that the system had tried to build. And now, everyone in the courtroom knew it. Maya slowly stepped back, her eyes never leaving Callahan. She didn't smile or gloat, she just stood there, waiting. Judge Wallace cleared his throat and slowly turned to the prosecutor. "Prosecutor Callahan, do you have any other witnesses or evidence that the court has not yet considered?" Callahan remained silent. He knew the game was over. Maya Jackson had won, and the system had just realized they had chosen the wrong person to frame. The tense atmosphere in the courtroom was suddenly disrupted by the rushed entrance of a police officer. The door swung open so forcefully that the documents on the table shook slightly, but everyone froze as he, with a hurried appearance and labored breath, stopped right in front of the judge's bench. No one spoke because this unexpected interruption was not just an ordinary development. This was not an emergency phone call or a document needing to be added. What the officer was about to announce could change the entire course of the trial. "Your Honor, we have just apprehended the real suspect. He has confessed." The statement exploded like a bomb in the courtroom, causing whispers to ripple across the room like waves in a lake that had just been stirred. To some, this seemed like good news, the turning point that could quickly close the case. But for Maya Jackson, who was still standing in the middle of the room, her sharp eyes tracking every reaction, this was not a sign of justice. This was a sign of something wrong. Everything was happening too fast, too quickly to be believable. Just moments before, she had cornered Prosecutor Callahan, exposing the holes in his arguments and revealing the lack of evidence in the case. And just as it seemed the trial was tipping in her favor, suddenly, a new suspect appeared with a confession so neat, so perfect, it was hard to believe. No further investigation, no close examination, just a statement. He confessed. It was like a backup piece that had been prepared in advance, waiting for the right moment to be placed on the table. Maya didn't speak immediately. She slowly scanned the room, from Judge Wallace, his narrowed eyes calculating, to the jury members exchanging curious nods, and then rested her gaze on the officer who had just entered. He was still panting, gripping a file tightly but not opening it, as though he himself wasn't entirely sure about what he had just reported. She spoke slowly, without hesitation or concern, but with a quiet, sharp confidence, the confidence of someone who knew something was off. What did he confess to? A simple question, but one that made the entire courtroom pause for a moment. The officer hesitated slightly, not immediately answering as he should have. His eyes flicked quickly toward Callahan. A tiny delay, but it didn't escape Maya's sharp gaze. A glance as though searching for instructions, as if he wasn't sure what to say next. Callahan, who had just recently found himself on the defensive, now seemed to regain his composure. He smoothed his tie, a faint smile crossing his lips as he turned to face Judge Wallace, his voice recovering the confidence it had lost earlier. "Your Honor, shortly after the trial began, the police received an important tip and conducted a swift investigation. As a result, they apprehended the real suspect, who has confessed to the entire crime. This shows that the defendant, Maya Jackson, is not involved, and we can officially close this case." Maya didn't look at Callahan but kept her eyes on the officer. She wasn't distracted by Callahan's words. It didn't matter what he said, because the important part wasn't in the statement but in the details of the truth. She repeated her question, this time her voice lower, with an edge. "So, what exactly did he say?" This time, the officer was clearly more uncomfortable. He licked his lips instinctively as if searching for a way to express himself properly, then answered slowly, but without the certainty he had earlier. He said he did it." Maya blinked, her lips curling slightly, but not out of joy, out of realization. She took a slow breath, then tilted her head, her eyes never leaving the officer. "You said he did it?" She repeated each word, her tone tinged with sarcasm. "Specifically what? Did he reveal how he did it? What details did he describe about the robbery? Did he mention which store was broken into?" The officer opened his mouth but didn't respond immediately. In that moment, the courtroom became as tense as a taut string ready to snap. Maya didn't wait for an answer. She turned to look at Callahan, who was still trying to maintain his calm smile, but clearly no longer as confident as before. "Did the police record this confession?" A simple question, but it made everything start to unravel. Callahan raised an eyebrow, as if he had just been hit at a weak spot. The officer turned to look at Callahan again, once more seeking guidance. But this time, Maya saw everything. It was clearer than ever. If the police didn't record it, do they have a written statement of the confession? No one answered immediately. The jury began murmuring among themselves, some appearing skeptical. Maya could feel the shift in the room. Piece by piece, the curtain of lies was being lifted. If he really was the criminal, why is there no document recording his confession? Maya took a deep breath before speaking again, this time not needing to raise her voice, but each word carrying the weight of a stone. "Because this is not a real confession. This is a setup." The courtroom erupted in shock. Whispers filled the air, and the jury clearly no longer believed what Callahan and the officer were saying. Some shook their heads, others whispered among themselves. Judge Wallace cleared his throat, calling for order, but even he was looking at Callahan with a thoughtful gaze. Maya didn't need to do anything more. She simply pointed out the truth, and the truth itself began to tear down the lies. If the system was willing to create a fake suspect to cover up an illegal arrest, it meant that Maya had uncovered something they didn't want her to know. And she wouldn't stop until she found the whole truth. The atmosphere in the courtroom remained as tense as a taut string after Maya exposed the lies in the suspect's flawed confession. Prosecutor Callahan, who had always maintained a confident and controlled demeanor, was now left flustered and angry, cornered by a 12-year-old girl. The police officer who had just made a statement about the new suspect was no better, his composure gone, his hands clenched as if waiting for an order to escape the awkward situation. Maya knew she had struck a powerful blow to the system these people were trying to protect, but she also understood that those with real power never let things end that easily. And as expected, just as whispers still buzzed in the courtroom, the main door slowly creaked open. Everyone immediately turned to look, and even Judge Wallace raised an eyebrow upon seeing the man who had just entered. A commanding figure, dressed in a black coat, walked steadily with each step, his polished shoes reflecting the light of the courtroom. No introduction was needed. Everyone in the room recognized Captain Frank Reynolds, the man whose authority overshadowed the entire law enforcement system in this city. He didn't walk hastily like the officer before, nor did he show any signs of panic or tension. Instead, he moved deliberately, calmly, exuding the aura of someone who always remained in control. He didn't need to rush, because he had planned everything from the start. Standing in the middle of the courtroom, he carefully observed Maya, as if evaluating an opponent who had far exceeded his expectations. After a few seconds of silence, he smirked, offering a smile that lacked any warmth. "This case is over, Maya," he said in a deep voice, but one filled with authority, as if his words were undeniable truth. Maya didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to hear any more to understand that Reynolds wasn't just an ordinary police officer. He hadn't come into the courtroom just to observe or to confirm information from Callahan. No, he was the mastermind behind this entire plan. Reynolds wasn't just a law enforcer, he was the system, he was the power, and most importantly, he was the one who decided who the criminal was, who would be punished, and who would be swept up in a fabricated case built on lies. Maya could feel the danger emanating from him, a chill creeping through her body, as though she were sensing a predator closing in. This wasn't a police mistake, a wrongful arrest due to carelessness or oversight. This was a deliberate conspiracy, and she had unknowingly become its target. Reynolds stood tall, his cold eyes sweeping the courtroom, pausing on each face before finally locking with Maya's. "The little girl has made quite an impression," he continued, his tone still unsettlingly calm. "But this is where it ends. The case is resolved. Another person has confessed, and now you can go home, continue being a good little girl, and forget everything that's just happened." Maya still didn't say anything, but her eyes sharpened as if dissecting each word he had just uttered. Reynolds didn't offer an explanation or try to justify what had happened. He simply issued an order, and he expected her to obey, but Maya wasn't the type to do what others wanted without question. "How coincidental," she finally spoke, her voice soft but full of meaning. "The case ends right when the people here can't find a way to charge me anymore. I guess that's just another coincidence, just like how I was arrested without any evidence." Reynolds maintained his faint smile, but his gaze grew colder. "You're imagining things," he said slowly. "Justice has been served, and you've been cleared. Instead of asking too many questions, you should know when to stop." "And if I don't stop?" Maya asked, not blinking. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Reynolds slowly tilted his head, his eyes darkening, like a predator staring down its prey, unaware of its own weakness. "If you don't stop," he said, his voice lower but still clear, "you'll realize that asking too many questions sometimes leads to undesirable consequences." A warning. No, a threat. He didn't need to shout or act aggressively. Just a simple sentence, a cold look, and Maya knew that Reynolds wasn't the type to just talk. Everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Callahan subtly turned his head away, as if he didn't want to get too involved. The officer who had just delivered news about the new suspect stood frozen, looking as though he wanted to disappear instantly. Even Judge Wallace, who was supposed to be the highest authority in the room, sat silently, showing no reaction. Reynolds was too familiar with power. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to be overtly threatening. He just needed to appear, and everyone knew no one should stand in his way. But Maya wasn't like the others. She could feel her heart racing slightly, aware that she was facing a force stronger than anything she had ever encountered. But fear wasn't something that would make her back down. Maya wasn't the type of person to walk away until she had found the truth. She didn't immediately respond to Reynolds. She just looked at him for a long time, memorizing the image of this man in her mind, committing every detail to memory. His eyes, his manner of speaking, how he controlled everything without issuing direct commands. And then, slowly but surely, Maya smiled faintly. "I think I'll keep asking," she said. The courtroom fell silent. Reynolds didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't change his expression, but his eyes grew sharp like a razor. And in that moment, Maya knew the real battle had just begun. Maya left the courthouse with a heavy weight pressing on her chest. Even though she had won the trial, been cleared of baseless accusations, that didn't mean everything was over. Captain Reynolds's gaze still haunted her mind. He didn't show anger, didn't argue or refute, but the way he spoke, the way he looked at Maya, carried a silent warning. He didn't need to shout to display his power. He only needed to stand there, silent but menacing, as if he had everything under control. And that made Maya realize more than ever, he wouldn't let her walk away easily. That evening, Maya sat by her window, gazing at the street in front of her house. Her house wasn't big, but it was always the place where she felt safe. However, tonight, that sense of safety seemed to have been broken. A black SUV was parked not far from her house. The headlights were off, and the car windows were covered with thick reflective tint, hiding whatever was inside. It made no sound, gave no indication of anyone being inside, but Maya knew it wasn't there by accident. All night, the car didn't move, standing still like a predator observing its prey. A chill ran down Maya's spine. She turned back to her phone, unlocked the screen, and the cold sensation grew even stronger when she saw a message from an anonymous number. "Stop digging or disappear." Just 6 words, but enough to make Maya understand the message. This wasn't a meaningless warning. This was an ultimatum. Something bigger was going on, and the people behind it had started to see her as a threat. Maya wasn't scared, but she knew she couldn't face this alone. She dialed the number of her best friend, Elijah Carter. Elijah was a tech genius, always digging into systems he probably shouldn't be touching. If anyone could help Maya figure out what was really happening, it was him. "Where are you?" Maya said as soon as Elijah picked up. "Playing a game," Elijah's voice came through. But Maya could hear him chewing on something. "You've ruined my evening. I need to meet you." There was silence for a moment before Elijah lowered his voice, as if he had sensed something was wrong. "Is something going on?" Maya looked out the window again. The SUV was still there. "Big stuff," she said, her voice more serious than ever. "Meet me at the library." "Maya, the library's closed by now. I know a place we can get in." Elijah groaned on the other end. "Again? I swear. One day we're going to get arrested for breaking into the library." "Then make sure today isn't that day." Elijah sighed but didn't decline. "All right, I'll meet you there." Maya hung up but kept her eyes on the SUV outside. She couldn't tell who was inside, but one thing was certain. They were watching her. And if they wanted her to stop, it only meant she was getting very close to the truth. Maya took a deep breath, shoved her phone into her hoodie pocket, and silently left her room, descending the stairs as quietly as possible. She knew she couldn't let her mother find out. If her mom knew someone was watching her, she'd immediately forbid her from going out. Maybe even make her leave town to live with her grandmother somewhere far away. But Maya couldn't give up now. She opened the back door, quietly stepped outside, and turned into the small alley behind the house, keeping out of the SUV's view. When she reached the end of the street, she paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and then started running toward the library. The city library had been closed for over an hour, but Maya and Elijah knew a secret entrance no one noticed. It was a back window. Its lock had been broken for a long time, but no one had fixed it. Elijah was already there a bit earlier than Maya, crouched by the window, holding a small laptop. "I still don't get why you always drag me into this stuff," Elijah mumbled when he saw Maya approaching. "Because you're better at this stuff than anyone else," Maya replied, crawling through the window, then holding out her phone. And because I just got this. Elijah glanced at the screen, then his eyes widened. What the hell is this? Who would send you a message like this? I guess it's the same group of people who set up the case against me. Elijah looked at Maya, then back at the message, the nonchalance from earlier completely gone. He opened his laptop, typed in a few lines of code, then turned to Maya. I can trace this message, but if this really is an organized group, they won't leave an easy trail. Go ahead, Maya said, her tone firm. Elijah typed quickly on the keyboard, his eyes focused. Maya sat down beside him, her eyes fixed on the screen, waiting. Minutes passed in silence, only the sound of the keyboard tapping steadily. Finally, Elijah stopped, staring at the screen with a look of confusion. Maya, I can't figure out who sent this message. What? You can't? Elijah shook his head, but then his face turned pale as he scrolled down a line of code on the screen. It's not that I can't find it, it's that I found this. Maya leaned in to look, and as soon as she read what was displayed on the screen, her whole body seemed to freeze. The message didn't come from a regular phone number. It came from an internal system of the city police department. A voice slowly echoed in Maya's mind. Not Elijah's, not her own, but Captain Reynolds's from the courtroom that day. If the girl doesn't stop, she'll realize that asking too many questions sometimes leads to unintended consequences. Maya gripped her phone tightly in her hand, her eyes burning with determination. He wasn't just warning her. He was hunting her. The night outside the library was eerily quiet, but inside, the atmosphere was as tense as a string about to snap. Maya and Elijah sat close together, the green glow from the laptop screen casting light on their faces, highlighting the focus and tension evident in their eyes. The threatening message had come from an internal system of the city's police department, and it could only mean one thing. The police weren't just watching Maya. They were actively trying to silence her. Elijah continued staring at the screen, quickly scrolling through lines of code, trying to trace the source of the message, but the more he tried, the more he realized something. I've never seen a security system like this, he muttered, eyes glued to the screen. I can break into the police servers to search for basic info, but there's an unusual layer of encryption here. This isn't something regular police use. Maya stared at Elijah's laptop, her mind racing with possibilities. What does that mean? Elijah leaned back, typing a few more commands, then looked at Maya with suspicion. It means there's another system running parallel to the regular police system. A hidden system, not for public eyes and definitely illegal. Maya clenched her fist. This only confirmed her suspicions from before. She had known something was wrong ever since Reynolds walked into the courtroom and declared the case was closed. She felt he was more than just a cop. He had the power to manipulate the system. But now, those suspicions were no longer just feelings. Elijah, we need to check the suspect they just arrested. Elijah raised an eyebrow. You mean the guy they say confessed? Maya nodded, determined. I want to know if he really exists. Elijah sighed, typing a few more commands into the system. A new window popped up on the screen, and the city police database interface appeared in front of them. Elijah clicked on the Search Criminal Records section and typed in the keyword, Nathaniel Brooks. The system ran for a few seconds. One result appeared, but as soon as they read it, both Maya and Elijah froze. Name, Nathaniel Brooks. Age, 19. Charge, theft. Date of arrest, today. The issue, no photo, no fingerprints, no prior criminal history, he doesn't exist. Maya squinted, rereading the record, still unable to believe her eyes. There was no data confirming that Nathaniel Brooks was a real person. No evidence of his existence before this arrest. No home address, no school records, no previous interactions with the legal system. He had just mysteriously appeared on the exact day they needed a suspect. "Elijah, this isn't normal." Elijah blinked, then sniffed in disbelief. "Not normal? Maya, this is absolutely impossible. The police can't arrest someone without any information. They need fingerprints. They need a photo for identification. They need evidence. But here," he pointed to the screen, "they have nothing." Maya bit her lip. She had suspected that her case wasn't just a mistake, but now that suspicion had been confirmed. This wasn't a case of careless error. This was a conspiracy. They had created a fake suspect to close the case. "Elijah, if I get convicted, if I don't defend myself, do you think the police will arrest Nathaniel Brooks?" Elijah was silent. He knew the answer. If Maya didn't clear her name, if she was convicted, Nathaniel Brooks would never appear. He was created solely for one purpose: to divert public attention, to make people forget the police had made a mistake in arresting Maya. Captain Reynolds had orchestrated it all. Elijah swallowed hard. "Maya, this is bigger than I thought." Maya clenched her fists, lowered her voice, her eyes shining brightly in the darkness of the library. "I think so too." She turned to look at the screen one more time. A non-existent name, a trace erased cleanly, a conspiracy covered up by such perfect negligence that it couldn't just be a mistake. Maya took a deep breath. If Nathaniel Brooks was just a creation of the system, then the most important question was, what exactly is the police hiding? The sound of Elijah's typing suddenly stopped. In the silent, dark library, the only sound left was Maya's heartbeat pounding in her chest. The two children had just discovered a secret that should never have existed. A person captured without an identity. A name that probably only existed on paper to silence public opinion. Elijah pulled his eyes away from the screen and turned to Maya, his voice unusually low. "We need to leave." Maya didn't need him to explain. She could feel the danger closing in fast. Her entire life, she had read stories like this, people who discovered the truth they weren't supposed to know, and then they disappeared without a trace. But now, she was no longer a distant observer. She was in the story itself. They both jumped to their feet at the same time. Elijah quickly closed the laptop and shoved it into his backpack, while Maya quickly glanced out the window, and that's when she saw it. The black SUV. It was parked right outside the library, under the flickering streetlight, its body motionless like a predator waiting for the right moment. Maya froze for a second. "Elijah," she whispered, her voice full of warning. Elijah looked in the direction of her gaze and froze too. As they watched, the SUV's door opened. A man stepped out, dressed all in black, his muscular frame, his eyes scanning the library as if he knew exactly where the two children were. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew they had no way out. "Elijah, the back door," Maya gasped, pushing him toward the narrow hallway behind the library. They ran through the darkness, their feet pounding on the old wooden floor. They couldn't run through the front. That was exactly what the people outside were expecting. Elijah whispered, breathless, "Are you sure?" More sure than ever. Maya felt the tension in each of her steps. She had once imagined herself as a skilled lawyer, fighting in courtrooms, but she never thought she'd be hunted like an actual criminal. Her hand gripped her phone tightly. Her mind focused on one thought. We can't let them catch us. The back door of the library was ahead. Elijah lunged for the handle, twisting it forcefully. It was locked. Maya felt panic rise but didn't let it control her. She gently tapped Elijah on the shoulder and whispered, "Can you unlock it?" Elijah hissed through clenched teeth, "I can try, but I need time." They didn't have time. From the front of the library, footsteps were growing louder, heavy, slow, but certain. The others were coming. "Elijah, hurry!" I know." He desperately pulled a bobby pin from his pocket and jammed it into the lock. His hands shook as he delicately turned each tiny mechanism inside. Maya turned around, pressed herself against the wall in the hallway, and silently watched ahead. The first figure had entered. He was tall, dressed in black, holding something in his hand. Maybe a weapon, maybe a communication device. But whatever it was, Maya knew one thing. He wasn't here to ask questions. Her breath grew heavier. "Elijah?" "Almost done." The second figure appeared behind him, then the third. They were scanning the bookshelves, searching. "We can't let them catch us." Maya glanced at Elijah just as he twisted the handle one last time. It clicked. The door flew open. Maya yanked Elijah's backpack, pulling him outside. They slammed the door shut just as they escaped the library. "Run!" There was no time to look back, no time to think. They ran through the dark alley behind the library. Maya's heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst from her chest. But just as they reached the end of the alley, when a glimmer of hope began to form in her mind, a pair of headlights flashed bright and blinding. Another car was waiting. Maya suddenly stopped, pulling Elijah back just as the car sped toward them. "Get out of the way." They veered off to the side, falling onto the pavement as the car screeched to a halt, its tires burning the asphalt where they had just stood. Elijah gasped, his eyes wide as he looked at Maya. "They knew we'd run this way." She swallowed hard. "They're hunting us." The car door in front opened, and a figure stepped out, neither fast nor slow, but completely calm. Maya recognized him instantly, even before he fully stepped into the light. Captain Reynolds. He wasn't wearing a badge or police uniform. This wasn't a legal arrest. This was a hunt. Reynolds looked at Maya, the faintest smile still on his lips. "That's a pretty clever girl you are, after all." Maya forced herself to stand tall, trying not to show any fear. "And you're dirtier than I thought." Reynolds' smile didn't fade, but his eyes grew more serious. He pulled a phone from his pocket, raised it in front of Maya's face, and within seconds, the screen lit up. Maya recognized it immediately. It was a picture of her mother. Maya's body froze. She felt her blood freeze in her veins, not because she was scared for herself, but because her mother had no idea. Reynolds tilted his head slightly, never breaking eye contact with Maya. "She can keep running, but if she truly wants to protect her family," he emphasized every word, "it's time to listen to me." Maya's hand tightened into a fist. Her breath became shallow and rapid. For the first time since this all began, she felt like she might lose. The night wind swept through the alley, bringing a bone-chilling cold. Maya stood frozen, her eyes glued to the screen of the phone that Reynolds had just raised. The image of her mother appeared on it like an unspoken warning. She had mentally prepared for any danger that could arise, but the one thing she could not afford to lose was her mother. Reynolds didn't need to threaten with violence, nor did he need to issue arrest orders. All he needed was to strike at Maya's deepest fear. She took a deep breath, her eyes tense but unwavering. "If you touch my mom, I won't stop." Reynolds smirked, but this time the smile was no longer casual. It became cold and frightening. "Do you think you have a choice?" Maya didn't respond, but instead of letting fear control her, she acted. In a split second, she signaled Elijah with a glance, and before Reynolds could react, Maya spun around and kicked him hard in the knee, causing him to stagger and lose his balance. Elijah didn't need any more instructions. He grabbed her hand, and together they ran. They sprinted through the alley, their footsteps echoing in the dark. Reynolds cursed behind them, and immediately others started chasing after them. But Maya and Elijah had a plan. They knew they couldn't run forever. They needed a place to hide, somewhere even Reynolds couldn't reach. They needed Vanessa. And Vanessa Jackson was not just family. She was a lawyer, one of the best at taking down people like Reynolds. For years, Vanessa had fought against the corrupt legal system. She knew that justice was just a concept on paper, and in reality, those in power would do anything to protect themselves. Maya and Elijah reached Vanessa's apartment at midnight, both out of breath, pale-faced, but there was no time to rest. Vanessa opened the door, wearing a long coat, her hair tightly tied back, her eyes filled with worry when she saw her niece in such a state. "Maya, what's going on?" Maya didn't hesitate for a second, handing over the phone, pointing at the threatening message and recounting everything. The fake arrest. The police fabricated a non-existent suspect. Reynolds was chasing them. And now, Maya's mother was being threatened. Vanessa wasn't surprised, but she was angry. Not because Maya had gotten herself into something bigger than she could handle, but because she knew how dirty the system really was. "Reynolds isn't just a cop," she said, her voice deepening with danger. "He's controlling the whole system, part of an underground power network. If he's personally involved in this, it means you've stumbled upon something far bigger than just a wrongful arrest." Maya stared at Vanessa. "So, what do we do now?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow, then sighed softly. "We need to hide, but at the same time, we need to find a way to expose him before he gets a chance to silence you." She grabbed her phone and made a call, all the while keeping her eyes on Maya and Elijah. "We're going to a safe place, but you need to understand, once we go down this path, there's no turning back." Maya clenched her fist, her eyes determined. "I never intended to turn back." A few hours later, Maya, Elijah, and Vanessa left the apartment and drove out of the city. Vanessa had a trustworthy friend, a former investigative reporter who had uncovered many police scandals. If anyone could help them expose the truth, it was this person. They drove along the quiet highway, the streetlights stretching like streaks of light passing through the car windows. But as soon as Vanessa turned onto a smaller road, an SUV appeared in the rearview mirror. Elijah turned pale and looked back. "Maya, they've found us." Vanessa gripped the wheel tighter and sped up. But just as they were racing forward, another car appeared from the opposite direction, blocking the road ahead. They were surrounded. Maya felt her whole body tense, her heart pounding so fast she could hear it ringing in her ears. Vanessa pulled a gun from the glove compartment, the one she always kept to protect herself in situations like this. "Maya," she said, her voice low and firm, "listen to me. When I tell you to run, don't hesitate. Elijah, you too." Maya pressed her lips together, fear spreading in her chest, but she couldn't let it control her. "Aunt Vanessa, they won't stop." Vanessa nodded slightly, her eyes filled with understanding. "That's why we won't stop." Outside, the door of the SUV opened. The first shadow appeared under the streetlights. Maya didn't need to look closely to know who it was. Reynolds. He walked toward them, hands in his pockets, his calm demeanor as if nothing in the world worried him. Maya took a deep breath and looked at Vanessa. Her aunt didn't look afraid, but she was ready to fight. And so was Maya. They wouldn't let Reynolds win. No matter what it took, they wouldn't back down. The air thickened like a heavy fog, enveloping the empty road. The headlights of the SUVs parked around them shone brightly, cutting through the darkness, but that light didn't offer any sense of safety. Instead, it made everything feel even more tense. Reynolds stood amidst his subordinates, hands still tucked in his jacket pockets, slowly stepping toward Vanessa, Maya, and Elijah. The night breeze brushed through his silver-streaked hair, but he showed no urgency or worry. He had won many times before. He believed today would be no different. A faint smile appeared on his sharp face, his gaze resting on Maya, as if evaluating a prey that had just struggled in a net but couldn't escape. You, girl. People like you aren't allowed to win. His voice was deep and calm, yet carried a pressure that left no room for resistance. Elijah swallowed hard, his hands clenching the backpack as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Vanessa stayed still, but Maya could feel the tension in every breath her aunt took. But what Reynolds didn't know was that Maya had prepared for this. She was no longer the frightened child cornered into a situation. She was no longer an unnamed victim in the system Reynolds controlled. She was the one who had uncovered the truth, and now she would make him pay. Maya slowly raised her phone, the light from the screen reflecting on her face, her voice clear and unnervingly calm as it rang out. I've been recording from the start. The world seemed to freeze for a moment. The smile on Reynolds' face vanished instantly. Elijah gaped at Maya, while Vanessa raised an eyebrow in shock, but then her eyes quickly flickered with hope. Maya pressed play, and immediately Reynolds' voice boomed from the phone's speaker, strong, sharp, undeniable. We don't just need criminals to maintain the system. We need the right kind of criminals. Those no one cares about, people who, if they disappear, no one will ask questions. Who does this little girl think she is, trying to break that? Reynolds froze in place. He couldn't believe his ears. The men behind him exchanged confused glances, clearly unsettled by what they had just heard. This wasn't slander. This wasn't an unfounded accusation. This was evidence. Undeniable. Maya looked Reynolds straight in the eye, maintaining her composure, showing no fear or hesitation. Now you see why I'm going to win, don't you? Reynolds clenched his fists, his jaw grinding so hard that his muscles tensed. Throughout his career, he had never found himself in such a situation. A child, a 12-year-old kid. She had just exposed the entire system he had built over the years. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure, but for the first time in his life, he realized he had underestimated his opponent. And Maya wasn't about to stop. She lifted her finger to the screen and pressed a button. This recording has been sent to every reporter I know. As soon as they hear it, your game is over. Reynolds froze. His eyes darkened, but instead of backing down, he gave the order immediately. Get the girl. No more subtleties. No more indirect threats. Just the blunt command of a desperate man. As Reynolds' subordinates rushed forward, Vanessa acted without hesitation. She slammed her foot on the gas pedal. The car roared like a wild beast, tires spinning on the road before it shot forward. Maya and Elijah jerked in their seats, gripping tightly to the chairs, while Vanessa steered and yelled, "Hold on!" Reynolds took a step back, but the car barreled through the barricade, knocking one of the black-clad thugs aside. Another SUV revved its engine, chasing after them, tires screeching on the pavement. The chase in the night had begun. Vanessa expertly turned the wheel, steering the car into the main road, while Maya held the phone tightly, ensuring the evidence wasn't lost. Behind them, 2 SUVs were close on their heels, headlights blinding, casting long shadows on the pitch-black road. Maya took a deep breath, trying to calm her wildly beating heart. She knew Reynolds wouldn't let them escape easily, but this time he was no longer the one in control. This time, Maya had the upper hand. She had the proof. She had brought the truth to light. The only question now was whether they could survive long enough to see it through. The roar of the engine echoed through the night as Vanessa accelerated, leaving the black SUVs behind. The streetlights flashed by the car windows like blurry streaks of light, but Maya didn't dare lose focus for even a second. She gripped her phone tightly, eyes fixed on the screen as if it were the only weapon that could save them now. The recording file had been sent, not just to one reporter but to dozens, including social media influencers. Maya had planned this ahead, knowing that if Reynolds truly was part of a powerful network, traditional media wouldn't be able to act fast enough. But social media could. She opened the news app, and a new notification popped up right in front of her. Shocking. Recording. Police. Cover-up. Case. Frame innocent person. Maya's hand trembled as she tapped on the article. Reynolds' recording had spread everywhere. Hundreds of thousands of shares in less than an hour. People were talking about it, asking questions, demanding justice, calling for an investigation. Reynolds had controlled the system, but he couldn't control the truth when it was exposed to the world. Within a day, the wave of anger spread throughout the city. Protests erupted outside the police headquarters, with citizens hitting the streets holding banners demanding answers. A group of civil rights lawyers filed a petition for a federal investigation into the police system and passed questionable arrests. Prosecutor Callahan, who had tried to convict Maya without evidence, was immediately suspended. The police department struggled to control the situation, but social media had taken the truth out of their hands. The press dug deeper, revealing that Maya's case wasn't the only one. Many black and poor people in the city had been framed like her, falsely accused, coerced into guilty pleas to keep the system running. Authorities could no longer ignore it. The city police department was officially under investigation. Senior officers were fired. Jurors were summoned to review past cases that had been manipulated. The largest purge in history began, sweeping through every department, every unit of the police force, eradicating those who had exploited the system for personal gain. Things seemed to be heading in the right direction. But there was a problem. Reynolds had disappeared. As soon as the recording was leaked, the police went to Reynolds' apartment to arrest him. But his apartment was empty. There was no sign of a hurried departure, no belongings left behind, no evidence that he had fled. He didn't run. He had planned ahead. The media reported that Reynolds might have received a tip-off about the investigation, allowing him to escape before the official arrest warrant. Federal agents were assigned to track him down, but no one could find any trace of him. His bank accounts had been frozen, but most of the money had already been withdrawn. No passport, no evidence he left the country. One thing was certain. Reynolds was not arrested, and he was still out there. Maya sat on the doorstep, watching the phone screen scroll through the news updates. They had won, but not completely. Vanessa came out of the house, holding a cup of coffee, her gaze on Maya, full of understanding. "You did something no one thought a 12-year-old girl could do," she said, her voice low but filled with pride. "You brought down an entire system." Maya didn't reply right away. She knew she should feel proud, but deep inside, something wouldn't let go. "But Reynolds is still out there." Vanessa fell silent. She knew Maya was right. A man like Reynolds didn't disappear without reason. He wasn't the type to give up. He would come back. And when he did, he wouldn't make the same mistake again. Maya clenched her fist, her eyes shining with an unwavering resolve. She had brought down his system once, but if he comes back, she would be ready. Maya didn't celebrate. Even though the entire city was shaking from the biggest scandal in the history of the police system, even though the people at the top had been exposed, even though justice had finally been served on paper, she couldn't feel the victory. Not because what she had done didn't matter, it did. But Maya knew well that this system hadn't truly collapsed. It had only retreated into the shadows, waiting for the chance to rise again, stronger than before. And that meant her fight wasn't over. A week later, with the public still boiling over the investigation, Maya sat in her room, her laptop open before her. She had spent every night sleepless, combing through every piece of data she could find, tracing Reynolds' steps. But he had left nothing behind. No new address, no financial transactions, no trace that an ordinary person could find. But Maya wasn't ordinary. She recalled the lessons from Aunt Vanessa, from her own case. When someone wants to disappear, they don't really disappear. They just shift to another network, a different system, where their power still exists. And if Reynolds had a plan to vanish, he had surely left a trail somewhere. Maya typed quickly on the keyboard, digging into one of the leaked travel databases Elijah had shown her. It wasn't an official system, but if someone had flown under a fake identity, it could still leave a trace. Bingo. The words appeared before her, like the last puzzle piece falling into place. Ticket purchaser, Franklin Reynolds. Flight date, 3 days after the recording was leaked. Destination, Washington, D.C. Maya froze, her eyes locked on the screen. She wasn't surprised. Washington, D.C. was the nation's center of power. If Reynolds wanted to disappear, protected by those more powerful than him, that was the place he would go. But what truly sent a chill down Maya's spine wasn't just that Reynolds had escaped. It was that he may have planned this from the start. She didn't tell anyone right away. Aunt Vanessa had done too much to protect Maya, and she believed the fight was finally over. If Maya told her about Washington, D.C., she wouldn't let her go. But Maya knew the truth. Reynolds had never just been a corrupt cop. He was part of a much larger network. And though he had lost in this city, he still had other pieces waiting. He wouldn't stop. And if he didn't stop, neither could Maya. She clicked on another tab on the screen, opening a flight booking website, her fingers gliding across the keyboard before stopping at a small empty box. Destination, Washington, D.C. Maya smiled softly, not from excitement, but because she had known this would happen. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Maya hit the book button. Reynolds may have vanished, but he hadn't truly lost. The system he protected was still there, hiding under layers of power that the naked eye couldn't see. Maya had beaten him once, but could she take him down completely, when the battle was no longer in a small courtroom, but in the nation's center of power? Washington, D.C. awaited Maya, but the real question was, would she be smart and brave enough to face someone who had been preparing for this fight all along? What do you think Maya will do next? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this thrilling journey.